Hey friends! Tonight, we step into the extraordinary life of a woman whose very existence was a blend of performance, resilience, and mystery. One that Western eyes have too often misunderstood, the geisha. Before we begin, if you find value in what I share, please like the video and subscribe. Only if it feels genuine. And drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from, and what time it is there. It's always a wonder to see the time zones gathered here, quietly listening together. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft hum. Let the world fade. Let's begin. You are born in Edo, the pulsing heart of Japan. A city alive with tea shops, monks, rice traders, and at least 4 people per street convinced they're the reincarnation of a warlord. You are a girl. Which means, historically, your fate narrows quickly. Marry someone uninspiring. Become a nun and embrace regret. Or enter the okiya, the geisha house, and spend decades pouring tea for inebriated aristocrats while pretending it's empowering. You are 6. You still find bugs fascinating. But today, wrapped in your best and itchiest kimono, your parents walk you through the streets. You don't know this yet, but they've already chosen. You're going to be a geisha. The okiya doesn't look like home. It looks like a library married a temple and gave birth to a building with strict emotional boundaries. A woman opens the door. She is Oka-san, the house mother. One glance at your bow and she already knows your worth. Your parents bow low. Words are exchanged. Then they leave. Quietly. Politely. As if handing over a borrowed umbrella. You are not adopted. You are now property. You become a shikomi, which is just a poetic way of saying, small child who scrubs everything. Floors, tubs, teacups. You carry water, stoke fires, and silently cry into your sleeves. The first lesson, silence. You watch the geisha glide past, untouchable, polished, silent. You observe. You absorb. Your room. The hallway. Your meals. After everyone else. Even the spilled rice is added to your debt. The house owns you, down to your tears. Your days begin before the sun and end when your back gives out. You fetch endlessly, slippers, tea, more tea, the other sandals. By noon, you've walked farther than most samurai do in a year, and made less noise doing it. Silence is your uniform. Bowing is your second language. And blinking, that's practically a political statement. Your education is informal and unrelenting. You're taught through failure and imitation. How to fold an obi faster than physics allows. How to bow until your spine files a complaint. How to pour tea without looking like you're pouring tea. You begin to notice. The tilt of a fan. The rhythm of laughter. The exact pause between sentence and smile. You realize that geisha aren't about beauty. They're about precision, timing, and total emotional control. Like diplomats in landmine territory. Years pass. You scrub floors until your knees forget what comfort feels like. But you learn. Slowly. Painfully. You begin to vanish beautifully. Then one day, the words you've waited for. You're ready to become a maiko. Congratulations. You've graduated from invisible servant to decorative existence. This is where the real suffering begins. The transformation is brutal. First, the hair. Professional stylists arrive with wax, pins, and an unnerving calm. They sculpt your hair into Nihongami, a lacquered tower of elegance and pain. From now on, you'll sleep on a wooden neck block, the takamakura. Comfort is dead. Long live posture. Then, the kimono. It's breathtaking, heavy, and clearly designed by someone who hates shoulders. The obi weighs as much as a toddler and sits in the middle of your spine like a grudge. Dressing each day is a team effort, and a slow descent into textile-based existential crisis. Your accessories, kanzashi hairpins, gorgeous, delicate, and sharp enough to duel with. They silently announce your rank, your training, and how badly you'll be judged if you wear the wrong one. As a maiko, your job is to watch, serve, and sparkle. You are not there to speak, laugh loudly, or ask why. You are there to become art. A cherry blossom wrapped in silk. A smile balanced on aching feet. Yet, for the first time, people see you. Not because you're special. Because you're new. and visible, and exquisitely exhausted. Your makeup becomes your armor. White rice powder from forehead to neck. Red and black around the eyes. A single red-painted bottom lip, because tradition says rookies only get half a mouth. It's elegant. It's surreal. It's a mask. And beneath it, something stirs, power. This face demands attention. Not for vanity, but for survival. You are now art. A girl painted into existence. And then, the shamisen. A three-stringed instrument that sounds like a haunted banjo and looks like a spatula with attitude. You practice until your fingers scream. You learn music, poetry, conversation. But not just talking, you learn emotional aikido. If a man brags, you nod and talk about the moon. If he flirts, you compliment his sandals. You're a master of elegant deflection and quiet diplomacy. Eventually, you learn about the dana. A wealthy patron who funds your career, your kimono, your life. It's not romance. It's business. A delicate one. Chosen not by you, but by the house. You smile. You endure. And you learn to manage his ego like it's part of your job, because it is. Some are kind. Others, less so. But you perform. Always. Because being a geisha is not about seduction. It's about control. Over the room, over the mood, over yourself. So here you are. 15. Painted, trained, and half-starved. You pour tea while reciting poetry. You smile through pain. You wear beauty like a weapon. And the world calls you elegant. They don't see the training, the tears, the debt, the silence. But you do. And maybe, just maybe, that's where the power lives. Either way, the system was never built for love. It's built for leverage. And your only hope is learning how to tip the scale in your favor. Gracefully, silently, all while wearing 3 layers of brocade and pretending the room isn't metaphorically, or literally, on fire. One day, someone hands you shoes that resemble miniature wooden buildings and says, "Put these on." They're called okobo, towering wooden sandals meant for ceremony, elegance, and possibly vengeance. There's no padding. No logic. Just splinters and judgment. They're worn exclusively by Maiko, so if you're wearing them, you're now expected to float across Kyoto like a silent procession, not trip, not cry, not die. Walking in okobo is like performing ballet on stilts. Every step is a balance check. Rain makes it worse. Wet stone, wooden platforms. It's an obstacle course disguised as tradition. But that rhythmic clop-clop sound they make, that's your new soundtrack. It's beautiful. It's unmistakable. And it tells everyone within 5 blocks exactly where you are. Subtle. Not even a little. Eventually, your muscles adapt. You learn to turn corners with flair and survive stairs with dignity. Then someone adds a 12-pound obi around your waist and expects you to perform a dance routine. Welcome to apprenticeship. Wearing okobo is a badge. Full geisha wear flatter shoes. They've earned the right to suffer less visibly. You're still paying your dues, one aching step at a time. Let's clear this up. A geisha is an entertainer. You perform. You dance. You pour tea with precision and flirt with the elegance of a falling cherry blossom. You are art, not invitation. Courtesans, *, also wear elaborate kimonos, ornate hairstyles, but there's one key difference. If the obi is tied in the front, she's a courtesan. Quick access. Tied in the back. Geisha. Slow exit. You're welcome. Still, the confusion persists, fueled by pop culture and ignorance. So you learn the art of graceful correction. Ah, how kind of you to ask. Our traditions are quite different. Smile. Sip. Redirect. Repeat. You'll say this 100 times in your life. Each time, you draw the line again, with charm and clarity. Your greatest skill isn't performance, it's subtle resistance. Saying no without ever saying no. If a client makes an inappropriate suggestion, you don't flinch. You smile and say, "You must be very popular with women." Flattering. Empty. Deflecting. Another favorite, "Ah, such a shame, I'm terribly busy that day." He didn't mention a date? Doesn't matter. You're always busy. Or you let laughter do the work, a soft chuckle, a gentle head tilt, and a change of subject. This is your dance. You lead. They don't even notice. Over time, you become fluent in graceful deflection. You can turn down an advance 3 times and leave someone feeling like they just received an honor. It's exhausting, but it's an art, passed from woman to woman. A quiet power hidden behind folding fans and forced smiles. A geisha doesn't indulge desire. She manages it, redirects it. She makes the room feel magical while never losing control. And if all else fails, smile. Bow. Such an interesting thought. In ancient Sumer, one of the world's first civilizations, marriage wasn't a declaration of passion. It was a legal transaction, an economic alliance, and a vital cog in the machinery of society. At its heart was not affection, but accountability. Dating back over 4,000 years to the city-states of southern Mesopotamia, Sumerian marriages were often recorded in precise, unemotional terms. Using cuneiform script etched into wet clay, scribes created marriage tablets, essentially the ancient world's version of a notarized contract. These documents spelled out, in no uncertain terms, what each party brought into the union. A bride didn't enter her husband's house with dreams of true love. She arrived with livestock, fabrics, slaves, jewelry, or plots of land, her dowry. This wasn't a gift, but a form of economic collateral. On the other side, the groom's family often paid what was called a bride price, a sum offered to the bride's family, not as a token of gratitude, but more like a security deposit. The marriage tablet would outline what would happen in case of divorce or misconduct. If the marriage ended in disgrace or dispute, the contract dictated who kept what, who owed whom, and what needed to be returned or forfeited. You could think of it as a prenup baked in clay, to be stored in archives alongside property deeds and tax records. In Sumer, your love life could be audited. But these contracts weren't just about economics. Marriage was a powerful tool for social control. It shaped inheritance laws, preserved family status, and maintained order in a society deeply concerned with lineage, property, and the gods' favor. It was expected of both men and women to marry, not for pleasure, but to ensure the proper transfer of property, legitimacy of children, and continuity of the household line. Sumerian society was deeply patriarchal, and women, though they had some legal protections, were often positioned as dependents. Once married, a woman was expected to be faithful, fertile, and obedient. Her duty was to bear legitimate heirs and manage domestic life. If a wife was found to be unfaithful, the consequences could be deadly. Some marriage contracts included clauses that allowed for harsh punishments, including drowning or execution, if a wife broke her vows. A man's infidelity was more tolerated, though still frowned upon if it disrupted the social or spiritual balance. Despite this imbalance, Sumerian women had some notable rights for their time. In many cases, a wife retained control over her dowry, even after marriage. If the union dissolved or her husband died, she might recover her property and return to her birth family. Women could initiate divorce under specific conditions, such as abuse, infertility, or neglect, but only if they had strong evidence. Claims like, "we've grown apart," would have been laughed out of the council hall. Sumerian justice required tangible proof. Marriages, while legally binding, weren't elaborate ceremonies. There were no garlands, orchestras, or bridal processions. Instead, a wedding might consist of a private ritual, possibly invoking deities like Inanna, goddess of love and fertility, or Enlil, god of the wind and kingship. The real formality came not with a kiss, but when the clay tablet was dried and filed, the sacred union recorded like an invoice. The couple would then move in together, and from that moment, the marriage was officially recognized by the community and by law. This wasn't merely personal, it was communal. The community's acknowledgement made the bond legitimate. Marriage wasn't seen as a personal journey but a public commitment to stability, responsibility, and divine order. To marry was to enter into civic adulthood, to become a full participant in society's expectations. Whether farmer, merchant, scribe, or noble, your marriage was a way to transmit property, produce heirs, and uphold your family's place in a rigidly ordered world. In elite families, marriage alliances were even more strategic. These unions weren't about preference or personality. They were chess moves in games of power, politics, and preservation. Daughters might be married off to forge alliances between households, to strengthen political ties, or to seal economic arrangements. In these cases, Love was irrelevant. What mattered was the calculation, the number of sheep, the value of land, the influence of kinship. So while modern romantics may find ancient Sumerian marriage a bit clinical, it was essential to how the society functioned. It was a carefully managed system that served religion, economics, and law. Love, if it existed at all, was a luxury that might grow over time, but it was never the starting point. In Sumer, marriage wasn't just about two people. It was a contract with the gods, with your ancestors, and with the state, one written in clay, sealed by ritual, and bound by duty. As the 14th century unfurled its banners, Malbork Castle surged forward in ambition and scale. Expansion was relentless. The clang of hammers and chisels echoed year-round as craftsmen, masons, and laborers shaped red Gothic brick into a fortress that looked less like a castle and more like an empire in miniature. Local peasants, often conscripted, provided the lifeblood of timber, food, and manpower. Under their calloused hands and the direction of the Teutonic Order, Malbork grew, not just upward and outward, but inward, into something more profound, a political, religious, and military capital rolled into one. No longer merely a military outpost, Malbork had evolved into the nerve center of a theocratic state. Its turrets, towers, and chapels were both sanctuary and strategy. From this brick bastion, the Teutonic Knights transformed their original crusade into a campaign of conquest and colonization. What began as a holy mission to convert the Baltic pagans had hardened into a structured state with borders, laws, taxation, and an insatiable hunger for territory. The Grand Master of the Order, equal parts abbot, general, and monarch, ruled from Malbork with a grip both iron and pious. Beneath him, a rigid hierarchy of knights, priests, and lay brothers administered vast estates, governed trade routes, collected tithes, and led military campaigns. Despite their vows of poverty and obedience, the order's reach extended from monasteries to merchant ports, their influence woven through every fiber of daily life. The fortress itself was a marvel of organization. The high castle housed the spiritual and administrative core, chapels, cloisters, dormitories, and the chapter house where the order's most consequential decisions were made. Here, policies were forged, grand masters elected, wars approved, and alliances weighed. Below it, the middle castle served more practical purposes, housing visiting dignitaries, storing weapons, and managing the steady stream of goods, taxes, and spoils. At the base, the lower castle bustled with blacksmiths, brewers, servants, and the machinery of daily life. Every stone laid bore not just the weight of defense, but the burden of divine mission. Trade flourished under the order's watch. Roads were paved, bridges constructed, and German settlers encouraged to migrate and build towns that mirrored the design of the Holy Roman Empire, complete with marketplaces, town halls, and cathedrals. Pagan shrines were demolished or converted. Forests were cleared, and farmlands laid out in grids. A new, orderly civilization began to rise from the bones of the old. Malbork was both symbol and engine of this transformation, a sanctified fortress broadcasting order, discipline, and domination. But no empire expands without consequence. To the east and south, the Kingdom of Poland and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, two powers with deep grievances against the Teutonic Order, watched warily. Poland resented the Knights' encroachment on disputed territories. Lithuania, still defiantly pagan into the late 14th century, endured decades of brutal raids under the guise of conversion. The air grew heavy with tension, and by the final decades of the 1300s, a geopolitical powder keg had formed. Then, in 1386, came the detonation. The Grand Duke of Lithuania, Jogaila, converted to Christianity and married Queen Jadwiga of Poland, becoming King the Ladislaw II Jagiello. This dynastic union merged two powers into one formidable Christian bloc, and, crucially, stripped the Teutonic Order of its divine excuse for war. With Lithuania baptized, the knights could no longer justify their campaigns as holy crusades. Their cause had been morally undercut, but their ambitions remained. The resulting conflict boiled over into one of the most decisive confrontations of the medieval era, the Battle of Grunwald in 1410. Facing off against the newly united Polish-Lithuanian army, the Teutonic Knights entered the battlefield with their finest armor and utmost confidence. But discipline was no match for numbers, tactics, and resolve. The Knights suffered a devastating defeat. Their Grand Master, Ulrich von Jungingen, was slain. Thousands of Teutonic soldiers lay dead. It was a catastrophic blow, not just militarily, but symbolically. In the aftermath, the Polish-Lithuanian coalition marched directly toward Malbork, seeking to drive the sword into the heart of the order itself. But Malbork, designed to withstand the apocalypse, endured. Its vast stores of grain and weaponry, its towering walls and boiling oil, its clever defenders led by the new Grand Master Heinrich von Plauen, all held firm during a grueling 2-month siege. Disease and frustration eventually forced the attackers to withdraw. The castle had survived, but only just. The Teutonic Order emerged weakened, wounded in spirit and stature. Their aura of divine invincibility was gone. Over the following decades, internal strife, mounting debt, and widespread discontent among subjects eroded their authority. Hefty taxes, levied to fund military rebuilds, alienated cities and merchants. A storm brewed from within. In 1454, it broke. The Prussian Confederation, a powerful alliance of towns and nobles, rose in rebellion and pledged allegiance to Poland. Thus began the 13 Years' War. And while the order initially held strong, its financial lifeline snapped. In 1457, with funds depleted and morale low, the Bohemian mercenaries stationed in Malbork accepted an offer from King Casimir IV of Poland, payment in silver for surrender. Without a fight, the once impenetrable fortress changed hands. Poland had not stormed Malbork's gates, they had bought them. The Teutonic Knights, humiliated, retreated to Königsberg. Their state survived, but the dream of an iron-fisted theocracy ruled from Malbork was finished. The age of crusaders had ended. In its place rose a different legacy. Now under the Polish crown, Malbork Castle entered a new chapter as a royal residence and regional seat of governance. Though its monastic austerity softened, its grandeur remained. Kings visited for ceremonies and inspections. Ballrooms replaced chapter houses, tapestries replaced armor. Still, the walls remembered. The fortress retained its identity, not just as a symbol of Polish ascendancy, but as a living monument to centuries of war, faith, and transformation. Malbork no longer roared, but it endured. And the story was far from over. The once mighty fortress of Malbork had become little more than a crumbling shell, too large to ignore, yet too costly to restore. Its walls, once echoing with the clash of steel and royal command, now held only silence, shadows, and dust. Yet even in decline, Malbork never fully vanished. Travelers from across Europe still arrived to sketch its silhouette, marvel at its fading grandeur, and imagine the age it had once ruled. During the Romantic era, artists and thinkers, enchanted by medieval ruins and tales of chivalry, began to see the fortress not as a relic of the past, but as a timeless emblem of nobility. Malbork became less a ruin, and more a memory etched in stone, a frozen whisper of a more heroic age. Still, the castle stood largely neglected, its legacy muted by time. But the 19th century brought change. As nationalism surged across Europe, so too did a newfound reverence for the medieval past. What was once forgotten became a symbol. In Germany, where a growing sense of national identity sought historical anchors, Malbork, renamed Marienburg, rose again, this time not as a stronghold of war, but as a monument to Teutonic glory. Prussian historians and architects launched a painstaking restoration. Gothic motifs were studied, reimagined, and rebuilt with fervent care, though often more guided by 19th-century romanticism than medieval accuracy. What emerged was not just a reconstructed castle, but a cultural icon. Paintings, operas, and schoolbooks celebrated Malbork as the cradle of knighthood and German strength. Emperors visited. Ceremonies were held in its great halls. The fortress became myth and memory, fused into brick and timber. But history is never static. After World War I, Malbork's future grew uncertain. And after World War II, everything changed. In 1945, as Soviet forces advanced into East Prussia, the castle was bombarded. Fires gutted its interiors. Stone collapsed. Once again, war brought ruin. After the war, the territory was redrawn. Malbork, now Malbork, became part of a newly reborn Poland. Its identity shifted once more. No longer a symbol of German pride, it became a reclaimed piece of Polish heritage, not for conquest, but for preservation. The Polish government launched another massive restoration. This time, the aim was historical fidelity and cultural inclusivity. Brick by brick, it was rebuilt not as a fortress of domination, but as a monument to endurance. Today, Malbork Castle stands as the world's largest brick fortress, a UNESCO World Heritage Site and a living chronicle of nearly 800 years of European history. Tourists wander its courtyards. Historians study its layers. Children run through its once bloodied halls. The castle no longer defends, it remembers. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic in the early 1800s, the United States was still a young nation with a restless heart. Its eastern cities buzzed with growth, but its gaze turned westward, to the vast wilderness beyond the Appalachians. This yearning was wrapped in a national belief, manifest destiny, the conviction that Americans were meant to stretch from coast to coast, no matter who or what stood in the way. What began as a slow trickle of brave families became a wave. By wagon, horseback, and on foot, thousands pushed westward, lured by cheap land, opportunity, and the promise of reinvention. Land grants and glowing newspaper articles painted the frontier as a paradise of fresh soil and new beginnings. But this journey was not for the faint of heart. The trails, Oregon, Santa Fe, California, wound through mountains, rivers, and plains. Wagons, tightly packed with supplies, became rolling lifelines. Dangers lurked at every turn. Broken axles, river drownings, snake bites, disease, and wild animals were constant threats. And yet, hope pulled people forward. To many, the frontier was more than land, it was a second chance. A poor man could become a landowner. An immigrant could start anew. There were no titles to impress, no aristocracy to appease, just wilderness and willpower. But the wilderness was not empty. It was home to Native American nations whose lands were deemed untamed by those who now sought to claim them. At times, settlers and indigenous people traded peacefully, exchanged knowledge, and coexisted. Other times, broken treaties and land grabs ignited violence. Skirmishes turned to wars. Fear spread fast. And through it all, the land changed hands, often through force. On the frontier, life began with shelter. Log cabins, roughly hewn from nearby trees, became homes. They were simple, cold, and dark, but built with grit. Inside, families cooked over hearths, shared straw beds, and fought to survive. Children worked from dawn, gathering firewood, tending gardens, caring for animals. Women wore 1,000 roles: mother, doctor, teacher, farmer, protector. Men cleared land, built fences, hunted game. Every meal, every blanket, every candle flame came from labor. There were no markets or electricity. Just what could be hunted, grown, or preserved. Winters tested the limits of preparation. Food was salted, smoked, or dried. Firewood was life. Snow isolated families for weeks. Loneliness, particularly for women and children, was its own kind of threat. Yet even in hardship, communities formed. Neighbors helped with barn raisings, childbirth, and harvests. Religion stitched people together. Circuit-riding preachers brought sermons to cabins and fields. Education, when possible, was valued. A Bible, a slate, and a child willing to learn could birth a schoolhouse. Children grew up fast, tough, quiet, and skilled. They learned survival, not theory. They witnessed life and death without flinching. Their games were rare, their work constant. But they carried forward values of resilience, thrift, and cooperation. Frontier life was not just a triumph of strength, it was also a triumph of women's endurance. They kept homes running, families fed, and communities bound by compassion. Their letters, recipes, and quiet wisdom formed the heart of American pioneer culture. And as the years passed, the wilderness gave way to towns, then cities. Railroads crossed the plains. The census of 1890 would famously declare the frontier closed. But its legacy, of struggle, of promise, of pain, endures in the myths, values, and stories of a nation that once moved west, one wooden wheel at a time. Yet, the story of the American frontier remains deeply etched into the nation's identity, shaped by those who braved its hardships and carved lives from wilderness. The people who settled the frontier left behind more than log cabins, fences, and worn trails. They left behind a spirit, a national character rooted in self-reliance, perseverance, and ingenuity. The idea that one could shape their destiny with their own two hands became the bedrock of the American dream. The frontier ideal celebrated hard work, rugged individualism, and the freedom to forge a new path. These values still echo today in American culture, politics, and storytelling. But the legacy of the frontier is not without shadow. The same expansion that offered hope to settlers brought deep loss to Native American tribes. Lands were taken, treaties broken, and ways of life erased or irreversibly altered. Forests were felled, rivers rerouted, and wildlife decimated. The price of progress was high, and its scars remain in both memory and land. Still, the stories endured. Diaries, oral traditions, and family legends passed down the grit and heart of those early years. Figures like Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett became symbols of frontier daring, while women like Laura Ingalls Wilder gave voice to the quiet endurance that defined frontier life. Their lives were often harsher than the legends that followed, but the myths carried meaning, hope, and identity. Today, fragments of that past still remain. Weathered log cabins, hand-carved gravestones, and wagon tracks fading into prairie grass. Museums and historic sites preserve tools, letters, and artifacts, but the truest legacy is less tangible. It lives in the enduring belief that anyone, regardless of birth or station, can begin again. That hardship can be faced, land can be tamed, and something lasting can be left behind. The frontier may be gone, but its spirit of possibility still lingers in the American soul. Humanize 315 words.